Hello and welcome to the September Microsoft licensing update from the software asset management team at version 1. How's everybody doing today?
Very good,
Good,
thanks.
Carla.
Very well, thanks, Carl.
Good stuff. So only a few changes this month. Nothing. Well, we always say no major changes, but sometimes they have major impact for some organizations. But first up, who wants to take the floor? Neve, what did you look at this month?
Well, considering I think the last session that we had reviewing the product terms and changes, I kind of brought up about the changes to Teams rooms. And it looks as though they have done an update to that where they have changed now the license and availability for Teams rooms. So effectively, Teams Room Standard and Premium are gone, and they've done a change in both like the license type and license name to Microsoft Teams Room Basic, which is effectively for small organizations that want to use a free version of Teams Room with limited functionality for up to 25 Teams Rooms devices. And then they've renamed, I think and then the other change is there's Teams Rooms Pro, which is, as you can imagine, it's the paid for version of Teams Rooms and available through the enterprise agreement, etc. Whereas you have both Pro and Basic are available to order via the web or from the Microsoft Customer Agreement and CSP and so on. So it's interesting to note because of, there are going to be some changes where Microsoft are going to enforce where Teams rooms devices, like conference room devices, specifically for to run Teams rooms, they're going to enforce a change where customers will not be able to use an actual user, like my user login, etc., on a conference room or Teams rooms devices from July the 1st of next year. So it is good to note, and that customers should be aware of if they're doing that, like in practice.
Yeah,
So that's it from me on Teams rooms.
interesting one. I think without looking at the pricing in a huge amount of detail, but there's probably some scenarios where customers might be applying, full fat feature rich M365 plans to resource accounts like a meeting room. And although obviously there's a cost associated with this Teams room, should I say, pro license, it might in some cases provide some cost saving elsewhere, right? So it's probably not all bad news, right? So there's probably some benefit in there in terms of a cost optimization technique that might be able to be you might be able to use. So Richard, I know you love looking at all the privacy and security terms updates. I think there was only one there this month. What was the latest and greatest from that?
Yeah, so Microsoft simply updated the Office 365 service geographic areas to include Qatar. Essentially, this is where your data is stored. So what Microsoft will consider your at-rest data for M365. Essentially, wherever the customer is generally where they like to keep the data stored as well. In the past, I believe if it was in Qatar, it would have been stored in UAE, but now adding Qatar into the list means any data that is being gathered in Qatar stays in that region as well. So it's just more information about where customer data is stored, the accessibility. It might help with latency and things like that, and also with regulations around data protection. But it's just more about the geographic location of your data, really. So very simple update to this one.
Interesting. It's probably something we're going to see more of over the next year is increase in focus on data sovereignty by Microsoft. I
Absolutely.
think Inspire there was a whole bunch of announcements around data sovereignty. So interesting to see those changes take place.
Yeah.
On Azure, I think there was like one update this month. I don't know who wants to take that one.
Yep. Um,
Wayne.
yeah, so this was the the updated Azure Data Box and Azure Stack Edge terms to focus on use rights and create clarity. So essentially, whether they've created clarity, but I think they've been fairly hard and fast, saying ultimately the customer is responsible for these devices which sit on prem and then talk back to Azure in a controlled and sort of direct link into Azure. So you have a box sitting in the corner, which is your data box or your Stack Edge, and you're not allowed to basically open those boxes. You can't do anything with it. You're responsible for the appropriateness of using that device on-prem. That's not Microsoft's responsibility to spec it out for you. I think also the other one, which is quite clear, is the fact that the software is licensed and not sold. So you hand the box back, you lose the rights to any software that was running on there, and also the fact you can't disseminate or purpose out to a third party. So I think this is to prevent possibly smaller service providers using these data boxes or Stack Edge in their own data centers to then provide a service to a third party, to an end user customer. So it's just tightening up on the rules of that. So yeah, so it's just really the box sits there, you can't touch it, and it will just talk back to Azure. But the customer's always responsible for making sure it's the right box, and also that all the data is protected to the level they wanted it protected. That's not Microsoft's responsibility.
Good, interesting stuff. So I think so that was pretty much all of the updates for this month in line with the Microsoft product terms update site. The only thing to really throw out there, people probably need to be aware of is the October 1st timeline for Microsoft to introduce a whole variety of new licensing changes in the way that what we would call in licensing land authorized outsourcers or third-party hosted providers can allow organizations to bring Microsoft licenses to their environments. So I think if you saw some of our previous YouTube video, I think it was back in May or June, we also touched on this as a part of the Inspire blog that was pushed out sometime in July. But in effect, Microsoft are bringing a whole host of what you might say license mobility changes to Windows Server, Windows Desktop, and the Office suite, in the way that those software applications can be hosted on either dedicated or shared hardware. Now, the logic behind this change was that I believe there was a third-party hosting provider somewhere in France was making a claim that Microsoft's practice around the limitations of bringing these particular applications to third-party clouds was anti-competitive, and probably murmurings of some form of anti-competitive case being taken by the European Union. And as a result of that, we saw this announcement by Microsoft back in May. Now, these changes are going to take place in October 1st. We haven't seen exactly what they're going to look like, so I suppose we'll see what they look like in the next Microsoft product terms update video blog that we do, and in the associated blog. But I think what's most interesting about this is that these licensing changes don't impact what Microsoft refer to as listed providers. So Alibaba, Amazon, or AWS, and Google Cloud are not going to be impacted by these changes. So I think one of the interesting things we've seen in the press as we start to approach this October 1st timeline is, murmurings of discontent by, as you can guess, some of these listed providers, namely AWS and Google. So we saw the VP for Government Affairs and Policy at Google openly criticize Microsoft on Twitter over the last couple of weeks around the limitations that their licensing terms bring. Also, similarly, we saw a statement from AWS over the last couple of weeks on various different industry press websites, which are talking about how the licensing changes are being classified as being somewhat anti-competitive. So I guess you could start to see a kind of a potential doubling down from the listed providers with regards to their discontent as to how Microsoft's licensing terms apply to other service providers outside of the listed providers category of hosters. So yeah, this one will be interesting to see. Does this war of words escalate over time, and will we see some sort of a change in posture from Microsoft, whereby the same flexibility that's been afforded to authorized outsourcers or third-party hosters that fall outside of that listed providers category, will Microsoft change their posture? That remains to be seen. But I think the key thing is that, you know, organizations need to be aware of these changes that are going to be coming down the line in October, because it might, you know, provide a greater range of choice with regards to the number of third-party hosting partners that they could choose to use or bring Microsoft licenses to. Also, an important part about these updates and changes is that we're going to see the introduction of new licensing metrics around how Windows Server is licensed in virtual environments, both on premise as well as being able to bring those licenses to these third-party hosters. So yeah, interesting war of words that's, you know, on public display right now. It'd be interesting, as I said, to see if that posture changes from Microsoft over the coming months or a year. But in the meantime, you know, if you're an end customer, to a certain degree, this is going to create, you know, new choices for you with regards to how you bring third-party software to other clouds. So I think that pretty much about wraps up this month's Microsoft licensing update. As always, we'll be documenting all these updates in the monthly blog. If you have any questions, queries, do feel free to reach out to the Software Asset Management team here at Version 1. We'd be delighted to answer any questions you may have. Until then, we'll see you on next month's video. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.